types of covalent bond can be studied in the nature of the covalent bonds and the types of the overlapping. Now, on the basis of the types of overlapping, we can have the nature of the covalent bonds of two types. It's either sigma bond or it can be pi bond. Let us study both of these one by one. What exactly is a sigma bond is? When the overlapping is along internuclear axis, the bond formed is called sigma bond. And this type of overlapping examples are as what we have done just now: SS, SP, of course PX, PX. Now these overlapping always results in the formation of sigma bond. In this case, extent of overlapping is large. Therefore, it's very strong bond. Overlapping is along internuclear axis. So these are the basic properties which makes sigma bond very strong. Also remember, this is the bond which is always is first to be formed, because whenever the two atoms are approaching each other, always remember their all orbitals which are lying along internuclear axis will be the one which is going to overlap first. So always sigma bond is formed first. We cannot have a simple pi bond formed first between two atoms. No, it's not possible. It is first the sigma bond formed. Yes, if there is a possibility, then only the pi will be formed. Let us see now how these sigma bonds are formed by the overlapping of the orbitals. Let us take first SS, 1s of the one of the atoms overlapping the s of the other atom. Now again, this is the area of overlapping along the internuclear axis, this one. Now let us see your SP overlapping. In this case, what we have is one of the s orbitals of one of the atoms combining with the p orbitals of the px, of course, of the other. Now this overlapping is the overlapping which is leading to the formation of the bond, and this is the internuclear axis. In a very similar way, we can have a pp overlapping, since in this case what will happen is the electron densities along internuclear axis. This is the overlapping which is happening here, and this is the internuclear axis we have. So all these three are your cases. This is the px of this and px of this. So all these three are the cases in which what you can clearly see the atomic orbitals overlapping are the overlapping is taking place along internuclear axis, and that's why the extent of overlapping is very large, and that is why these sigma bonds are very, very strong. Also, the most important thing, the electrons, only the one unpaired electron which are present in these overlapping orbitals must be having opposite spins. The same spins, with same spins, if the orbitals are coming, they will repel each other. So we are always keeping this thing in the mind, that whenever these two orbitals are overlapping to form the bond, the unpaired electron must have the what? Opposite spins. Fine. Now let us move to find out what exactly is a pi bond. Now pi bond is the bond which is formed by the overlapping of atomic orbitals like py, py, or PZ, in which the overlapping is not taking place along internuclear axis. The overlapping is not take place along internuclear axis. It's a sideway or lateral overlapping. Whereas in case of the sigma bond, it was head-on overlapping along the internuclear axis. That's why the extent of overlapping was very high. In this case, it's a lateral overlapping. So what we can write is it's a sideway or lateral overlapping, which is taking place in this case. Now this sideway or lateral overlapping is what is the overlapping which is not will be as large as we have in the case of the sigma bond. So since the extent of overlapping is not very large, the bonds, pi bonds, are not very strong. They are not strong, at least not as strong as the sigma bond, normal sigma bond is, because the extent of overlapping is not very proper or not very large. Another important thing, they are the bonds which are formed always after the formation of a sigma bond. When the two atomic orbitals have already overlapped to form a normal sigma bond, then only the sideway overlapping takes place, because the two atoms comes very close to each other. That is why only the sideway overlapping takes place. So pi bonds are the bonds which are formed always after the formation of a sigma bond, and they are always present along with the sigma bond. We cannot have an isolated completely pi bond between two atoms. Let us see how these are formed in the orbital pictures. Now let us see how the pi bonds are formed. Suppose the overlapping orbitals are this this py overlapping with another py, and this is your internuclear axis. What you can find is the electron density is not along the internuclear axis. So when they overlap, what kind of an overlapping they have is, they have an overlapping like this. So this is the very small extent of overlapping we can have in this case. Don't consider these two overlappings to be the formation of two bonds. Because these two lobes indicates the overlapping can be upward and downward, and this, since there's a lateral or sideway overlapping, the extent of overlapping is very, very small. The same will be the case in case of if the overlapping is between PZ and then PZ, it will be very, very small. The extent of overlapping will be very small. You can see here, this is the internuclear axis. Electron density is not present along the internuclear axis. It is this small distance, small extent we are having this overlapping. So these are called your pi bonds, which are not as strong as the sigma bond is. Always, again, the most important thing you have to remember, which I have explained to you just now, that it is always is this sigma bond which is formed first, and because of the formation of a sigma bond, since these atomic orbitals py and pz comes very close to each other, their sideway overlapping takes place. So this is a normal sigma bond and this is a pi bond. Therefore, we can say that always, whenever, like in the case of carbon-carbon forming double bond, one bond will be sigma, other will be pi. And whenever there is a triple bond, what we can say is one is sigma and other two are pi. And similarly, in case of nitrogen, the three bonds which this nitrogen is having, one is sigma, the other two are pi. Any one of these can be your sigma and the other will be your pi ones. So this is what is exactly is your main concern and the types of the bonds.